I have so much to talk about. Hey, I'm Amy and welcome back. I am talking about the new Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, huge, amazing collaboration of amazing stars movie, The Post. This movie, I have been excited for this movie for so long. Well, for the past, I don't know, 5 months. I'm not sure when they first kind of talked about this. I know for sure though that it was one of my first reactions. Like the minute the trailer was posted, I did a reaction to it on Stardust. So it had to have been sometime in October, late October, early November. So November, December, January, only 3 months? Anyways, I have been super excited for this movie because if you guys watch my channel, you know I love a good biopic or based on a true story or any kind of period piece movie like this. And I am quite a history buff if you did not know. I mean, I love learning about history. It was one of my favorite classes in school. This movie just hits it right on the head. Even as much as I love history, I did not know this much about this story, and I don't know how much of this is true and how much is fabricated or kind of just a little bit of creative leniency on it, but it is still a great story to be told, and it's a story that we need to hear right now. I have so much to talk about with this. I do not even know where I want to start. I think maybe I will start with the acting because that's a little bit maybe the smallest bit that I want to talk about. Well, it's probably the second smallest, but it'll be the easiest for me to start out at. Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks are pretty much the leads in this. They are great as always. Tom Hanks, I found I'm not saying he was bad. I'm just saying I just did not see a different range or different side of him than you would see in probably any other movie. I feel like he played the same kind of character he played in Sully. He just looked slightly different, and he played a slightly different job, I guess. I feel like that's how Tom Hanks is though. He kind of does play a little bit of the same role every now and then, especially as he's getting older. He's not Forrest Gump anymore, but yeah, I didn't feel like I was getting Tom Hanks in anything else than he's been in the past couple years, so that was a little iffy for me. But Meryl Streep, on the other hand, she can act, and I love her for that. She was so great. You really got the full character arc from her character, unlike the Matt Damon character arc and Downsizing. If you haven't watched my review on that, you may want to check it out because I go on a pretty lengthy rant about the character arcs in that movie. But Meryl Streep's character arc in this movie is great. You really get the feel at the beginning of the movie that she has kind of just been put in this position and doesn't really know or understand what or how she wants to kind of take hold of this position. She's very anxious about it, and she really needs a lot of help and guidance from, I think it's her lawyer. They never expressly say what he is, or maybe he's just a board member for the Washington Post, but she really needs help from one of her friends, Fritz, I believe his name is, to kind of help guide her along and help her with the decisions, the big decisions that she has to make for the company. But by the end of it, you really see how much she's changed, especially after she reads this note from her daughter that her daughter wrote years and years ago. She just becomes this really powerful woman who is in charge and wants to take charge of the company that she has been looking after since her father and her husband had passed away. It's just something that I really enjoyed seeing, just this powerful woman taking over a position that she was given because it was her birthright almost. Nobody else in the company or on the board really wanted her there. She was just kind of this woman and nobody really listened to her. Something else I'm going to talk about a little bit later, maybe if I don't talk about it too much here, is you can really see the divide between men and women. This movie is set in the late 60s, early 70s, so it is very much a thing where there was not only racial segregation for the most part, but there was also segregation between the sexes. It's not like a huge difference, but there were definitely roles for the men and roles for the women, and Meryl Streep's character of Kay really was trying to break those roles down towards the end, and you really see how the women really looked up to her, and it was just so empowering to me, and I hope to other women who see this, that women are very much in charge and at large, and they can do great things. There were also a ton of great supporting actors in this movie. Bob Odenkirk, for one, was superb. I mean, this was such a very big difference for him from any of his comedy stuff that he does with David Cross, or any of his stuff as Saul Goodman on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. He just was a different character. And speaking of David Cross was in this movie and I didn't realize it. I love David Cross, especially in Arrested Development, one of my favorite shows. Sarah Paulson as Tom Hanks' wife was great. I saw a lot of people, or a lot of sites, crediting her as starring in this movie, but she really doesn't have as big of a role as I thought she would have, and I really wish she did have a bigger role because I love seeing her act. She's such a great actress. Another slightly smaller thing that I wanted to kind of get out of the way before I get to the big meat and potatoes of my review is a little bit of the camera work and editing that was in this movie. I love this movie. It's a great movie, but there were some very strange editing and filmmaking, like cinematography choices from Steven Spielberg on this. There was this really great long scene with no cuts, just a one-take conversation focusing on Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep just sitting in the frame together talking at a table. And it was so good. It felt almost like they were just riffing on each other. They weren't even reading off of a script, which very well could be, because that's what a lot of directors do in cases like this where they just do one long take. They just kind of let the characters riff a little bit. It felt like that, just not in an improv-y style, like a comedy improv style that you would see normally, but I really enjoyed that. But it was so random, just placed in the middle of a usual two-shot, like a over-the-shoulder, you see Tom Hanks' shoulder and Meryl Streep's face. If you know filmmaking, you know what I'm talking about. It was just very weird to see that place just smack dab in the middle of a two-shot like that, and then it goes from that to a point of view running shot, then to a follow shot, and it was all on shaky cam, whereas the previous shots before were very stable on a tripod or a steady cam, and it just kind of threw me off a little bit because these two scenes were very different. But now that I'm talking about it out loud and thinking about it, I see why he did it a little bit. I feel like, yeah, I see why, and I think this might be a spoiler, so spoiler alert. If you know the story, this won't be a super spoiler, but I feel like the scene in the restaurant that's just one stable, long take is just the calm before the storm, leading into the point of view running and shaky cam where everything kind of changes and shifts. Okay, so yeah, that does make sense to me now. Totally makes sense. I get it. Okay, so I don't have that much of a problem with those scenes anymore. Now that I kind of talked it through with you guys, thanks. I appreciate that. I know you guys really loved enjoying my thought process on that. If you do want to see me talk about that stuff, I would love to talk about that, like in a video. Give me some ideas of scenes you want me to just pull from and talk about my thoughts on the camera work and things like that. I really do enjoy talking about that kind of stuff. It's what I went to school for. So yeah, please let me know if there's any scenes from different movies that you want me to talk about. I can start a whole new series on that. Anyways, other things I want to talk about this movie, I have 3 pages of notes. I have a lot of notes. I think this is the most notes I've taken on any movie besides Blade Runner 2049. One of the big things I really wanted to talk about in this, I had touched on a little bit already when I was talking about Kay, the publisher of the Washington Press, played by Meryl Streep, is the kind of segregation between men and women. The segregation between men and women, plus the whole freedom of the press thing, really makes this movie something very topical. Even though this was about something that happened in the 60s and the 70s, it's still very topical. Today, with all of the sexual assault cases that have been happening recently and the president threatening the freedom of the press pretty much. And if you don't care about politics, you may want to kind of stop watching this video now because I may get a little politicky. I will try to be as bipartisan as I can, but just know I am not a fan of our current president. So, that being said, I am going to talk as neutral as I can about some of these topics. First off, the segregation between men and women, between the sexes, is something that is not very noticeable. They don't really point it out a whole lot, but it is noticeable. You do notice it. There's a very brief moment at the beginning of the movie where Meryl Streep is walking to the boardroom after she has been rehearsing her kind of speech that she's giving that board to decide to take the Washington Press to the stock exchange, or whatever the terms are for that. The doors open to the boardroom and it's full of men in black suits, and she's just dressed in this lovely gray blazer and she looks very nice, but she's gray, so you can tell the difference right away that she doesn't necessarily belong there, and all the men are grouped together and she's there by herself. So you start getting this separation between the men and the women, but it keeps going further than that a little bit. Later, there's a dinner party at Meryl Streep's character's house, and then the men kind of start talking about politics, and one of the women say, well, I guess that's our cue to leave, ladies. So the men get up and kind of cluster at one end of the table, and the women get up and go into a different room and start talking about the fashion section of the Washington Post or the New York Times, whatever magazine, whatever newspaper they were talking about, probably the Washington Post, because they do focus a little bit more on the Post's fashion page and how Meryl Streep's character doesn't want Tom Hanks' character to keep publishing that. And it kind of snowballs from there. Later on, you see Meryl Streep's character walking into a boardroom again, and this time there's a bunch of women standing outside of it, and she's kind of walking up through the women into the boardroom, and they're all kind of watching her. And then towards the end of the movie, she's walking down some steps through a big crowd of women, and they're just all watching her while all of the men are kind of gathered over to the side. They're just watching her in awe of how much power she has taken for herself and become just this really powerful woman amongst all of these men. And it was such a great scene to see how powerful a woman could be back then, just taking what she wanted for herself. And finally, the probably roughest part of this video is going to get a little politicky, so if you haven't backed down now and you don't want to hear about politics, you may want to do so. Anyways, this movie is very core, is about the threatening of President Richard Nixon, of the freedom of the press and essentially the freedom of speech. It's threatening the First Amendment rights of the people of the United States. And that is something that is happening in our country right now. Essentially, when the president doesn't like something, the current president and Richard Nixon doesn't like something negative being said about them, they claim it as false. Well, Trump claims it as false or fake news, but I feel like it is a very mirrored image of what this movie is talking about, and what this movie essentially is about is all of these things that happened with the Vietnam War were covered up by President Nixon, by his Secretary of State, to just kind of put the right ideas that they want, or put the ideas that they want to be in Americans' heads there, by falsifying what happened over in Vietnam and what's happening over there, just so they don't look bad for not winning the war, or for the war not going the way they exactly want it to. Which isn't the same as people calling the president an idiot and not fit to do his job, but essentially it's the same thing, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, I really hope that the comment section doesn't turn into a giant political debate, because I feel like that's what it's going to do. But there are a couple quotes that I wanted to read off that I wrote down that just kind of really summed up this movie for me. They're quotes. One is from Tom Hanks. Actually, two of them are from Tom Hanks' character. He said about, well, the character, Tom Hanks' character, for context, was good friends with John F. Kennedy. And he says that politicians and the press trust each other. They used to trust each other. But after Kennedy was shot, he was talking to Jackie Kennedy, and she said, anything I've said here doesn't go into your paper. And he felt very shocked by that, by the fact that she thought that he would betray her trust and not print something like that he was only using her as a source. And later on in that monologue, he goes on to say about the press and the relationship between the press and politicians. If we aren't holding them accountable, who is? Which is something that I very deeply believe is at the core of this movie, is you have the right to hold your government accountable, and freedom of the press and freedom of speech is the way to do that. And the final quote is a quote within a quote, because it is a quote during the kind of end scene. One of the editorial ladies for the Washington Post is speaking from, or I'm not exactly sure how to explain this scene, but she's on the telephone listening to the judge give its final decision on the court ruling on the ending of free press, ruling for the New York Times and the Washington Post. And the judge says, and the press is to serve the governed, not the governors. Which I really loved that quote, because again, it goes with my thoughts on you have the right to say what you want to, within reason, I guess, but you have the right to use what you know to make sure your government stays in check. Even if you agree or disagree with the politics of it all, you need to know the truth, and you should know the truth. And I feel like I'm getting a little X-Filesy here, but you should know, or in general, the government should let you know things like what they were keeping hidden and secret in Vietnam, like why they are sending hundreds of thousands of boys and men to war to die for no reason, is something that the people should have known. They shouldn't have been keeping up that war just to serve their own political gain. And there were so many other things in these documents, like rigged elections and things like that, that they don't go into too much detail. It was focused mainly on the war in Vietnam, but it still holds the same truth. So I really hope I didn't get too politicky here. I tried to stay as neutral as I could, but I don't think I did. And I just really hope you guys are civil in the comments. It might get a little tricky down there, so watch out. But I do want to give a final rating for this, and I think you guys know what I'm going to give this. I am definitely adding this movie to my collection. I really enjoyed it. Of course, it's a biopic. I would watch this over and over and over again. It's such an interesting just story in general, not just the fact that it was about this great moment in history. So that's pretty much all I have for the post. Let me know what your thoughts on the post are in the comments down below if you have seen it. And thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, whoever you are. Let me know who you are in the comments down below, and let's be friends. If you enjoyed this, leave a like and subscribe if you're new, because I love talking movies, filmmaking, TV, nerdy fun stuff with you guys, just having a big old conversation about it. And I hope you stick around, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!